Peace, everyone. Just a reminder, we will be closing the submissions for the book awards on July the 10th. We really hope that if you are an author, Muslim woman, and you have published a book in the last couple of years, that you will submit your work and have it, inshallah, entered in to win awards, the Strange Ink Book Awards 2024. Really hope to hear from you. If you have any questions about that, just check out the information under this audio. Have a wonderful and beautiful and blessed day, and we will dive right into today's episode, which, by the way, is a throwback from an interview that Aishah, did with Khadijah Hayley, an editor who is part of Strange Ink, about writing stories. We hope you enjoy it. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Peace.
Your voice has power.
Hey, assalamu alaikum. Peace, everybody. Welcome to today's live, which I am so excited about. Inshallah, Sister Khadijah is going to be joining us very shortly. So, bismillah, just waiting for her to arrive. And alhamdulillah, here she is. So, Sister Khadijah, if you can hear me, please just request. All right, you have requested. MashaAllah. Okay, great. I'm going to go. Hope you're well. Okay, Sister Khadijah, let's see if it's working. Bismillah. Oh, yes, it's working. Yes. Alhamdulillah, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. So normally I have my earphones in, but today I was just like, I'm going to go minimal effort because I have to like do this whole setup thing. And I was like, I just want like a nice herbal tea and just a conversation, inshallah. So alhamdulillah.
Yeah, let's keep it cozy.
Yes. Yes, so alhamdulillah, how are you today?
Alhamdulillah, I'm as well as I can be, as I'm sure everybody else is, feeling drained. I think that's the only word I can use to describe it. And it feels really surreal trying to do anything because it's like there's this cloud over all of us. And even opening the app now to come on live with you, and you're seeing things in it. Alhamdulillah, I'm so glad we can't get away from it, because we know from previous experiences that, you know, things kind of teeter off and everybody stops talking about it. So I'm glad nobody's stopping and that but it's draining.
No, you're right. You're so right about that, subhanAllah. So we did a recent episode on the Strange Ink show where we were talking about how overwhelming the emotions can be sometimes. And then I know people as well who have spoken to me about what's happening, and they say, like, my husband, he was talking to them and they were like, I don't even feel like the intensity anymore because of how many I've seen. I just see it. And I was like, I pray that we don't get to that stage, because that is like, that's dangerous, you know, because that's a trauma response. You're literally reacting to something because you're trying to protect yourself, and now you can't even feel what's happening. And I think that's really scary. So
Bruce, my husband said the same thing. Yeah. Because he called me the other day whilst he was at work, and I'd been scrolling, as you do. And normally I stop. I don't watch as much. I'll stop to watch conversations when I see people debating how I can discuss and talk about this. But when it comes to the images coming out of there, I've seen enough to convince me that something needs to change. I don't need to see.
Yes.
So I usually skip past.
Yeah.
But I didn't this time, and I stayed. And my husband called me, and I was in bits. And he just said, subhanAllah, like, he doesn't get like that now because he's just become so numb with everything, is that I don't know, and that helplessness is starting to set in. And it's so important we don't get to that stage, and try and keep having conversations, keep talking about it in the most healthy, productive way possible, so that we can maintain it, because it's a long road ahead.
Absolutely, yeah. And it will not be solved anytime soon, you know? So that's why we have to keep talking about it. And I think that's really relevant to today's whole topic of what we're talking about, why stories matter. And sometimes, like, you know, there's 3 action points we're going to talk about today, but just to like introduce it, I was just thinking the other day how
you know, some of us want to write a story about what is happening in a way that is very personal, something that's very creative, but it takes so long to write the novel, right? And I remember speaking to my husband about that, and he was like, you can do other things at the same time, because the whole point of art, like I was listening to something yesterday, and he said the whole point of art is, a beautiful point of art is when you marry what is happening right now with what could be. So you're kind of like giving hope to the people instead of just focusing on what is happening right now. And that is how art is powerful. That is how story is powerful. So are you ready to begin, inshallah, the discussion?
Absolutely. You've actually mentioned something that reminded me as well. I know we're not totally going into this part of the topic, but it's the fact that when you write a story, and this is something that I see time and time again, when a writer wants to explore something that's happening, but because we ourselves don't know what the solution is, the story then lacks a solution at the end. And that's where you can take something present and relevant to today as part of your middle part of the story, and then you can end it in a beautiful way that you think should happen. So like I said, the way the world should be. So the story can begin with a reflection of what the world is like now and end it with how it should be. And keep that satisfying ending to give people hope to move forward.
So there's a kind of like insight that you're talking about that the writer has in a way that is an answer to so many things, right? That's so powerful. Yeah, you're so right about that. So why do stories matter? Why do stories matter?
I mean, stories have been told since the beginning of time. Even before we were writing it down and publishing books, like stories were told orally because they connect to your heart. And I think that's so, so important. Stories make people feel. And it connects people to a subject matter that sometimes a factual book or a non-fiction book doesn't quite build that connection. And as we know, for change to happen, you need to feel it here. We know what needs to happen, we know what's going on, and we know that there is a problem, but unless we feel as if we're experiencing it in real time, we don't have any hope of actually making a change, because stories, without you realizing it, can get right into, they can change your brain chemistry. And that phrase has actually become a bit of a trend as well. And people are starting to share online stories that change my brain chemistry. And it's actually a fact. It changes you as a person. It alters your perspective. And I just feel that sometimes people really struggle to connect to nonfiction if they don't already have an interest in that.
Yeah.
Whereas stories can spark that interest, can spark that desire to know about something. Because before you know it, you're intrigued. Using made-up characters, you're intrigued by what could happen. And you're seeing real-life parallels, and we see that all the time.
Absolutely. And, you know, subhanAllah, it's so interesting you say that, because there's another dimension to that as well, because there's the non-fiction, which isn't as enticing, it isn't really as moving, but I think sometimes the insight that you gain from certain books, for example, say, I'm just going to give a random name, Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. He talks about how trauma is inside of the body and all of these things. So when you write your characters and then you're explaining their life story and how they are reacting to situations, whatever that is, it comes with such a power and insight and knowledge. But it's really a tool, isn't it? It's like a tool to build you up and make you stronger in yourself, and then to be able to give a message, and hopefully our listeners from now are realizing that we have a very strong belief, Khadijah and I, that stories are important and they matter so much more than we've been taught, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. It creates an empathy. And there is a difference between sympathy and empathy. And because I know we were going to go into and talk as well, like how the impact that stories have on people. So we've already said that, like, it makes you feel, it builds that connection if you don't already have a connection to that subject matter. But a lot of people sympathize with what's happening. And the trouble with sympathy is it doesn't imply action. That's
doesn't. So true, yeah.
You can sympathize with something and honestly, to me, it sounds like I always, whenever I think of sympathy, remember when I used to like talk to my mum when I was younger and I said, oh, I've got so much homework, and she'd go, oh, there's no, like, he's like, oh yeah, I get it. But there's still an element of detachment there.
Yeah.
When you empathize, you're actually feeling it as if you are experiencing it. If you're experiencing that trauma, which you do when you're reading a story or watching a movie or however that story is being given to you, when you feel that it's your trauma, you are more inclined to fix it. You're inclined to move into action. And that's what we need right now. We need people to act. Now, there are a lot of decent people out there who don't need a cinematic experience to get them to care about what's happening. Those aren't the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people who try and stay comfortable. The people who read to escape. And I'm one of them. I read to escape a lot of the time. But when you do that, sometimes you can't connect with what's happening in the real world either. You can't do that too much. And by having a story that has those real world parallels in it, makes you empathize with somebody, because this isn't just a mass amount of people. If you tell, so using the situation that's happening now, if you have a story, a nonfiction book that's listing off all the statistics that are happening, we're becoming desensitized to that. We are being massively desensitized to these massive, huge numbers in their thousands of what's happening.
Sister Khadijah, give me a minute. I'm just going to switch off.
Okay. I'm sure she'll be back in a sec. Let's just see some of the... Yeah. Oh, alhamdulillah, yeah, you agree.
All right, alhamdulillah, it's off. I'm so sorry about that. Literally just because it's so loud and I don't have my earphones, and I'm gonna be like really distracted.
Okay. I was just going through the some of the comments as well. But sorry, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so we're becoming desensitized to these big numbers. Now, if you shrink that down to one number, one person, okay, and you tell it specifically from their point of view, that has a massive, massive impact. More so than numbers in the tens and thousands. It truly does. And I'm seeing it more and more when you see some of the stories that are being shared as well. So there was a little girl, you might have seen it, a little girl called Reem, whose she had a very special bond with her grandfather. And that one, I knew when I saw the picture of the grandfather holding this little girl, I knew I don't want to know the story. I don't want to know the story. That I could see the history there, but I saw it. I found another news report and it came up, and he kept coming up in my feed. So I stayed for that video. And seeing her play with him and the games that she plays, and seeing her run to him, seeing her toys, you are connecting with that one individual. And it's really sad that we have to share these personal details. We have to share these images in order to get people to care. But that's just the way human beings work. It's a defense mechanism. We shut down. We become numb and we shut ourselves down. And as a way to protect ourselves from that trauma, it is a natural response. What stories can do, what bringing it down to that individual and that empathy can do, is break through that defense, so that we can actually wake up and think, how am I going to fix this? Because all of a sudden, it's not somebody far off in a distant land. You're experiencing it in real time as you turn these pages. You are having that empathy. Now, it's not going to work for everybody. As we've seen, some people have read these things, seen these things, they still don't want to do anything. They've read books and they've gone, oh yeah, I fight for the revolution. And, they empathize with these characters. But when it comes down to it, they're defensive.
They've got nothing to say.
No,
right?
Nothing. So it's not going to work for everybody. But it does work for are those stuck in the middle. Those in that neutral zone that have art but are just themselves. It's those that stories can break through, and it can give the people who are already in that fight, it can give them hope. So important.
Yeah, no, you're so right about that, subhanAllah. And I do remember the video from Reem and her grandfather, and subhanAllah, I had been doing the same thing what you're doing, And I had been putting kind of like those barriers there a little bit, I guess those boundaries, because it was getting so overwhelming, and the sharing. And I already felt like I know, I'm convinced, as you said it perfect. I'm absolutely convinced, right? Something has to happen, right? We need to do something about this. But then I came across the video of Rima and her grandfather, and I just sat there and I watched it, and I was like, this is unbelievable. This is absolutely shocking, And that was a story of one person. And subhanAllah, that is what the people who are doing right now in the media, in the press, they are going to Palestine right now, and they are literally becoming martyrs because they're putting themselves there to capture one story. And it's so powerful, subhanAllah. So I totally agree with everything you just said. And the sympathy part as well, for sure. And I just want to say something about the sympathy. With sympathy, there's this feeling within us that we are pushed to do something from guilt, right? We feel the guilt, and we're like, oh, I feel bad if I don't do something because I'm not really a good person and this person needs my help, that. But then doing things from empathy is doing it from compassion, because you're like, because I have to do this. I feel this is something that is literally from my heart, like from my deepest heart. I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do, as opposed to, if I don't do it, I'm going to get, so it's subhanAllah, even the reactions are so different, and you see it in so many people and how they're dealing with the situation. But I just want to say something as well, about we did a voice note thing yesterday, and you said something about President Snow and how there was a whole thing, and then I gave you a whole thing right back, and I'm like, where are they right now? But I'd love to talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I'm sure people might have seen, so The Hunger Games is gaining, it's a story, it was originally a trilogy of books, and interestingly enough, I've not read the books.
Me too.
They came out at a time when dystopian fiction was on the rise.
Right.
And you had the Divergent trilogy, you had Hunger Games. They all started kind of like when teen fiction went through sort of a vampire era, then it went through this dystopian era, and then it moved on. But Hunger Games is taking a little bit more attention now because a prequel movie just came out. But the original movies has a scene when the main character, Katniss, is that she doesn't want to fight. She's aware that by fighting, the government and the authority that she's under will create harm for her people because they're just going to fight back. It's best, this whole, well, let's just not fight. Let's just try and keep our heads down. And she has of that in her. She's a very reluctant heroine, as we call them, where they're just kind of being forced into this role, but doesn't really want to engage. And I'm trying not to use buzzwords, but a hospital is dismantled in an aggressive way. And there's a scene in that movie where she's stood there with the rubble behind her and there's a camera on her, and she directs herself to the camera directly to speak to President Snow, the leader of her people. And she's just you can tell the emotion. She's crying, she's looking, thinking, well, I didn't do anything, I didn't fight you, and now look what's happened. So, and she uses that phrase, if we burn, you'll burn with us, because fire is catching. And that phrase right now, if people would just take a moment and focus on that, fire is catching, if we burn, you burn with us. Let's stop this whole October 7th happened here, so now that, no. If people are exposed to enough trauma, enough pain, and enough death everywhere, that rage is going to build up, because we are just human. And that scene in that movie really, really, truly shows that emotion that, I don't want to fight, but you're not giving us much of a choice here. And it's so powerful. And now with everything that's happening, it's starting to make its rounds again. And the readers who loved this have connected to it. But there are also a lot of readers who saw the same scene, they watched the movie, they braided their hair like Katniss, and now they're quiet. Now they don't want to get involved. They were cheering for Katniss at the time, but now it's actually happening in front of their eyes. And they're thinking, oh, well, what about this? What about that? And it's not just happening with the Hunger Games. There are a lot of stories out there right now that show military corruption, propaganda, the corruption within governments, how blind both civilians and military personnel can be, and the brainwashing that happens. And I've said this before. There is another book. I'm not going to mention it only because the author has taken a bit of a neutral stance and people aren't very happy about it. But her book was one of the biggest selling books this year in the young adult fantasy science fiction category. And she had a second book released as well. The second one just came out a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
Everybody lost their mind when this book came out, myself included. I absolutely loved it. I was raving. I thought it was excellent. But I realized the reasons I thought it were excellent were not quite in line with the reasons other people saw. Now, yes, there was romance in there. There were dragons. There was all sorts of interesting stuff. And some people became so focused on that, they missed the fact that we had people who had grown as a government and squashed a rebellion. Not only had they squashed that rebellion, they had restricted where these rebels could be. And then the descendants of those rebels had to pay in a service. They were treated as citizens. They were tattooed and marked as traitors, like the descendants of traitors. And our main character had grown up believing that, oh, these rebels tried to kill us. They're going to hurt us. They want our safety and our whole country to be brought down. And she had been raised on this. She had studied, she wanted to study to be a scribe, which works with books and things like that. And as she goes through the process of the book, she realizes that the things she'd been scribing, the things she'd been reading had been altered. The true manuscripts had been disposed of. And the military that were on the front lines weren't saving their freedom, but pillaging villages. And the comparisons with this book and what had happened, I was in awe. I thought, this is fantastic. And you've thrown dragons in there to keep us interested all the way through. But it was just incredible. And to me, it was how a writer could take something and use that freedom and that liberty that you don't have with nonfiction. And I know people are angry with her, but as we know from past experience, depending on your current situation, especially in America, there is an awful lot you cannot say. There is an awful lot you are restricted with. And I remember seeing her response when people were like, speak out. They wanted her to ban her book being sold in occupied territory. She said no, she wanted it translated and she wanted it there. And people were angry. I understand why they were angry. I also thought that country could do with reading this book. That is one of the powers of stories. You have a liberty. You have a freedom to call out governments, list literally what they're doing, change a few names, add a fantasy backdrop, and then go, oh, but it's fiction. And you can't do that. You can't do that. And I don't think I don't think it's only this book, but there's so many books like that and showing that level of corruption, showing somebody going against the authority they'd been raised with to make a difference and change. There's been such a rise in those stories, and I don't think it's a coincidence that now we are seeing a massive amount of Gen Z and especially the readers and who are on BookTok and Bookstagram actually stepping forward and going, hang on, this is what they can
wait a minute.
See it for what it is. And that is the power of stories to change that brain chemistry. It doesn't work with everybody, but it works with a lot.
Absolutely. It works with the ones. You're so right. And it works with the ones who are open to the truth. Really, it's the truth. And it's so interesting as well because so many of the situations that are labeled in the media as TERROR and you finish off whatever, right? And all of that is so interesting because in books is romanticized, and in media it doesn't serve the system, right? So now it has to be called something else. And subhanallah, what labels can do, but you just have to really think for yourself, and it's so hard to do that sometimes. Even with social media, in Instagram and TikTok, if I'm on that for a certain amount of time, I think I would lose my mind. I'll be like, wait a minute, where's my voice? Because it has such an influence on you as a person as well, and the people you're around, etc. So so we talked so much about why stories matter, and we've also talked a little bit about how stories impact people. But do you wanna maybe go into that a little bit as well?
I think stories impact people, again, going back to that empathy and that strength and the conviction. There is a reason why when Harry Potter books were being released, you had midnight release parties and people queuing up for hours at midnight to grab up that book. I'm not going to deny whether I was in that queue as well. But you have people queuing for books. You have them jumping to the next one, pre-ordering. You don't see that kind of frenzy for nonfiction. You don't see it.
Yeah, no, you don't.
Or an avenue to have that impact on somebody and how invested people get. You just have to scroll through BookTok or Bookstagram for some of the recent books to see how connected people are to these characters. They don't exist. They don't. These characters are figments of somebody's imagination.
Yeah.
But there is fighting talk happening in defense of these characters and the decisions that they make. And I think it's so fascinating to watch most of the time. I realize how connected I get to it. So we've talked about how a story can impact you with regards to the world and make change. But it can impact people on an individual level. And I'm going to use a very recent read of mine that I recently spoke out on my own Instagram about the struggles I've been having this year. And, just mentally and emotionally, it's been a very tough year.
Okay.
And just last month, I read a book that gave me a spark of strength. And I wasn't intending to get that. It was just supposed to be, it was a fun read. It was A Course of Flames, Sarah J. Maas. Just one of those light books that my best friend had read and she was obsessed with it. She's like, oh, it's a great romance story. Please read it. So I thought, right, okay. I wasn't feeling anything. I felt so disconnected from things. And I thought, right, okay, I'll give it a read. And the main character in this book is broken emotionally. She's been through a lot of trauma and she has lost all interest in the things around her. And it's about finding that strength herself to train herself up, get her body strong again, to nurture her mind, connect with people again, to reach out, find some friends, build a circle of support around herself. That's just a subplot. But with everything dressed up around it, you connected so much to this character. And I found myself absolutely loving it. And I think, I need this kind of energy in my life. And I noticed I was making more of an effort. I had more of a desire to get out of bed. And I messaged my friend as well, because in the story, she is stuck in this house, and to get out of it, she's got to go down 10,000 steps. To get,
oh my gosh.
Like a circular step. So she keeps trying each day, how many steps can I go down, then work her way back up. The way my house is, I've got 2 floors, and my staircase is slightly spiral. I started feeling like that, making up and down, and I thought, what, I can't get to the gym because I just had a baby about a year or so ago. Still don't feel physically back to where I am at the gym. I could do a yoga video at home, but we all know I'm not going to. So I felt like I need to do something. I'm going up and down my stairs. Like book, I'm going up and down these stairs, get something, and I just felt so connected to this main character, and things started looking brighter. Because I was somebody who was in a very dark place emotionally and mentally, and I really strongly connected with that at the time. And she pulled herself out. Again, it was dressed in romance and magic and fantasy, but the whole message and theme in there. And truly resonated with me, and I hugged that book when I finished. Like, I literally sat, I was, wow. And it really made a personal impact, and that is the kind of impact a story can have when you connect. you connect with those struggles and you see them being proactive. That's another key thing that we can talk about another time, is making your characters proactive into helping that connection and helping them. I'm feeling that spark of inspiration and motivation to make a change, whether it's out in the wider world, in your community, in your family, or just on a personal level of getting some exercise and going up and down the stairs.
Yeah. No, but it's, you know, it's so much deeper than that too, because she's going through some emotional struggle, right? And I think that what we tend to do is we tend to put that under like we don't make it important, we don't prioritize it, and we live in a world where people are so like, get up and go, just do this, just do that, and you got to be there present, and you don't, it doesn't matter how you feel. But yeah, it does matter. It absolutely matters how you feel, and whatever you need in order to lift yourself up, bismillah, right? It's important, and subhanallah, that's what characters and story can do. And it reminds me of a book that I was reading, which is so different to your genres sometimes, and it's so different to the genre I'm interested in. But my brother, he actually recommended it to me, and he gave me his copy, and it was by Lisa Jewell. Have you heard of Lisa Jewell?
The name does ring a bell. What's the title?
None of This Is True.
Yes, I did see that pop up. Yeah, I'm not,
Yes.
but I do remember that pops up, and somebody said it's quite a riveting.
Yeah. So I mean, I was reading it and I was like, I have no idea what I'm reading, but as I'm going along, it's about this podcaster and it's about this woman, and they just kind of like their paths merge and so many things unfold. And as I'm reading it, there's a character in there, and I'm like, literally as I'm reading what is happening, I'm nodding my head, and I'm nodding my head. I'm like, yes. And I felt so seen, you know? And I told my brother, I left him like a really long voice note, and I was like, you don't understand what that did for me, because it made me feel validated, even though, you know, you don't want external things to make you feel validated, but at the same time, it helps, you know? Just to understand that other people have gone through it, they're going through it. It's an absolutely normal thing. So, and that is a story which it's not science fiction, but it's thriller, right? It's got that essence of mystery, and absolutely every story, very good story, has to have mystery in it, right? A story is a mystery, whatever genre it is. You're always questioning what's going to happen, right? So that was something recent as well that gave me strength. So subhanallah, it really does impact you. Sister Shabana said representation matters so much. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. And being able to see yourself in a character, even if it's very, very small. Because when we talk about representation, I'm thinking diverse books and from an ethnicity basis and from a religion. But sometimes all it takes is one little fragment of that character for you to go, I felt like that.
Yeah.
I felt like that. And some books that go out of their way to try and represent you too much, it can feel like it's ticking a box and you don't quite connect with it.
Yeah.
The book that came out when I was a teenager called Does My Head Look Big in This? Talk about the hijab. And I thought, I mean, I wasn't really, I went to an Islamic school, so wearing the hijab to go to school, I didn't really have a struggle. Everybody was wearing it.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't connect it, but I thought, main character's got a hijab, because back then we didn't have books like that. And it was there in the bookstore, and I thought, brilliant. And as I'm reading it, the only connection I had to this character was the fact that she wore hijab.
Wow.
I could not relate to any of her struggles whatsoever. I was like, okay, I don't get it. So all it takes is one element sometimes.
You know, kind of do you remember that time when very first time we talked? I was telling you about this show that I was watching. So questionable. I'm not even going to mention what it's called because it's so bad, right? It's not Game of Thrones, by the way. So it was a different show. Anyway, I was watching this show, and there was one character in there, and because of her, I watched the show, and I told my husband, I'm like, you have to watch this character. She's just like, she's human. And it was just so crazy just to see her love for someone. It was a mother and child relationship, her love for that person, and the things that she would do, and they were so questionable. But then at the same time, you're like, she's a mother. I mean, we're mothers, right? She's a mother. I mean, who knows what you would do for your child, right? So, subhanAllah, that character had so many weird, different, crazy angles. Like, you wouldn't even think of doing the stuff that she does, but just the way that the author and the filmmakers showed her love for her child, it just blew me away. I was like, I absolutely love this character. I love her craziness. I love everything about her. So yeah, I totally agree with you with that.
Being able to have that connection and just relate to a human struggle is, we need to try and lead more empathetic lives. And I genuinely feel that so many of the world's problems would be solved if
my gosh.
empathy. And stories is a way to do that. And I was having a discussion with somebody the other day. We were watching a show, and within the show, something unspeakable had happened to the girl in there. Won't go here, but we can all can fill it in. And we stopped the show just to have a talk, and I was so upset. I was like, that poor girl. And the person I was with was like, why did she go there? Why was she even there? Why didn't she just do this? Why did she just do that? And I realized, looking at this, as if he was in that situation, like, you might not make the same decisions. You might, you know, that doesn't take, I mean, my friend wasn't taking away from what happened, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Just the line of thought, whereas, and the difference is between me and my friend, I'm constantly reading stories. She doesn't.
Okay.
It's only value in non-fiction. Doesn't really stories. And I was like, sometimes you need to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes so that you can realize, do you know what? It doesn't matter how they got there. That's not and having that level of empathy and that, because I was sat there crying as if it had happened to me. I was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. I really, this is terrible. And yes, it can be draining sometimes, being that emotionally connected to something.
No, it makes you feel alive, you know. It gives you life. Absolutely. Yeah.
And just because that person is not real and those exact circumstances did not happen, that doesn't mean that some version of it is not happening out there.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, I also want to say, you know, subhanAllah, something else I listened to on the same show, on the same podcast show yesterday, was this show. And he said something. He said that I had just found out I had cancer. And I remember this thought came to me as I'm sitting in the ER emergency room. And I just realized something. And I was like, wait, hang on. The world isn't all broken because I feel broken. Around the corner, someone has probably just had a baby. There is the sun rising in the sky at this very moment. And look at all of the things, like good things that are happening. And sometimes, like, you know, we can become like that as well, where we feel like the world is broken because we're broken. And I'm not really sure how that relates to what you just talked about, the whole experience with you know, seeing what was happening. But maybe it relates in a way where sometimes when our perspective on life and other people and the way we perceive things can sometimes be a little bit, it can be a little bit biased, maybe. Biased. Yeah, filtered, and you choose to see what you choose to see, and you end up hurting people because of that, you know.
Absolutely. It does relate, and I think reading habits can sometimes correlate with the things that are happening. I've noticed, as you know, because part of my job as well, I'm trying to keep an eye on publishing trends. What are readers enjoying? What are they talking about? So what's happening in social media? And there has been such an increase in the desire for what's called cozy fantasies. And it's literally a low stakes story, meaning nothing bad happens. It could just be someone's opening a coffee shop and that's the story. But in a fantasy backdrop as well, it's low, it's providing some escapism so that you realize it and get your head out of this world and into another one. And what's good, because still the element of it is, you know, maybe friendship and trying to make things work, and you've got animals or nature or great description, and keeping the stakes low prevents that stress response that you can have sometimes when you're reading stories, and it can be something just sink into. And So I think it does relate in that sense when you're saying that, there's the world, there's so many other good things happening, and a story can focus on the bad that needs changing or the good that we need to hold on to.
Oh my gosh,
You need that balance. You need both. Otherwise you end up like getting desensitized, numb and helpless. And we can't affect change when we're like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sister Shabana, you also said something before about how there's not enough, I think you said something about not enough empathy in the world. And then that's why stories can bring that. Totally. And she also said sometimes we don't want heavy, deep stuff because we're already dealing with that in our day-to-day lives. Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. And I'm not a cozy fantasy girly normally. I like must have said dragons about 10 times in this conversation, but I like dragons. My battles, I like my big stakes. But even myself, I'm trying to read at the moment Babel by R.F. Kuang, which look at the art of translation and linking it with colonialism. And so far I'm 100 pages in. It's fantastic. But you've got this group of rich white men discussing cultures and the attitudes that they have in there. The writer was obviously showing how wrong this is and, trying to affect some sort of change to alter that perspective. But I closed the book for a moment and I went, I'm seeing enough of that. I can't deal. Yeah. So I then picked up the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, which is about a girl running her auntie's pumpkin spice cafe in this small... I'm just going to do this for a little. It's a balance. And then multiple books at the same time, depending on how I'm feeling, because I can't stay in that place for too long. I need to add a little bit of fluff in there, otherwise I'm down.
Oh my gosh, yes. I love that you said that, subhanAllah, and I totally agree with you. And subhanAllah, so we've talked about why stories are important. We've talked about, what else we talked about so many things, which is amazing, mashallah. And we talked about how stories impact people. And final thing we're going to talk about, inshallah, was, are stories less important than non-fiction? We have talked about that a lot as well.
We have. We touched on. I love your fluff. Yes, we all need.
What did you say, fluff reads? Yeah.
Fluff, you do.
Yeah.
With regards to fiction and non-fiction, I have this discussion constantly, and I think the reason I'm so passionately about it is the way I was raised. I had a family member who was constantly, put Harry Potter away, get the Quran out, and I'm like, yes, but I was 13 and constantly telling me, read the Quran, maybe to read the Quran, astaghfirullah, and I was just like, just leave me be. And I think because of that, I was constantly looking for the value that stories, and that non-fiction is just, and that has again altered my perception on things. And growing up, I've now in my adult life, I've actually made a job out of my love of stories and trying to help people write stories that can change the world. So I've always wanted to look for the benefit, just to try and say to that family member, no, look, see, this is valuable. I'm actually contributing to society this way. But I don't believe one is more important than the other. I don't think stories are more important. And I think this is the difference. People who push that non-fiction is the only thing we should read, they're trying to degrade stories, say they're not worth it. Just focus on non-fiction. Those of us who love stories aren't saying non-fiction is bad. And then it's,
and I have a little thing about this as well. Is this attitude of, listen, it's only one or the other. That is life. Like, it has to be one or the other, but there are so many nuances to everything. It's not black and white, and just, we want to clarify as well, when we're talking about stories, we're talking about fiction, right? Because there's stories which are in the Quran, which are some of the best stories, which I want to talk about that after, inshallah. But so fiction and non-fiction.
Fiction and non-fiction, definitely. And you can still get the elements of fiction that make fiction impactful in a non-fiction story, such as, like you said, the stories in the Quran or a memoir and things like that. But a fiction just gives you, like we talked about, that liberty to say you might not be able to say here. And I've worked with a lot of writers who are trying to get their own personal stories out there. trauma, whether they have gone through an abusive relationship or, you know, they've had some kind of very negative experience, but they have grown and learned from that and want to share that. But actually sharing it in its raw form is too much for them.
Oh, yeah.
So they've got an option. They can either shut down and not share it at all, but they don't want that. They want it to benefit. So then we blur facts and fiction together, and they can write a character going through that exact same trauma and coming out of it the other end. And when it comes to fiction and non-fiction, I want people to think of it like English and maths. That's we use one side of our brain for maths, we use another side of the brain for English. Doesn't mean that one important, one stronger than the other. We need both parts. You know?
Subhanallah. No, I'm sorry. Hold that thought. Hold the thought. Subhanallah. You know, so we have a new book coming out, inshallah. My first book is called A Woke Writer. And there's this term that goes around, which is like feminine energy and masculine energy. I do have a little bit of holdups about that. So the term that I use is left brain and right brain, because, you know, it's the same thing basically, but it's just more of a physical thing. But you're completely right. You're completely right. There's the mind, which is detailed orientated. You focus on the how and all of the kind of like the lines and things. But then the other part of the right brain is where you focus on the feelings and the why. And you need both of them. You need both of them, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so many things, like you said, with the feminine and the masculine, like we need so many things in balance.
Yes.
Absolutely. You need the disciplinarian, you need the nurturer. You need those two things work in sync with each other to provide the most beneficial growing environment. And that is where fiction and non-fiction can work hand in hand. You know, you read a book about the history of what's happened, you know, across the world. You can, you know, look at the facts and how we got here. And then you can read story that connects and opens you up to the myriad of other ways you know the human experience is evolving in this world. And I just think both are so important and we need both.
We do. And you know, subhanallah, it's so interesting as well because the human experience is evolving, but the human nature will always be the same. And that is why stories from thousands of years ago are just being retold. I mean, stories are just retellings of other stories, right? And someone said something. They said that you know, we think that we've advanced technologically, we think we've advanced in so many ways, but we are so similar to how we were thousands of years ago. We had the same issues back then, we have them now, we just have more toys. And then I thought it was interesting because, you know, the Quran is the book full of stories, and one of my favorite movies is Planet of the Apes. The recent one, just the whole trilogy, and they have another one coming out, inshallah, next year sometime. But that's like my favorite movie. And I kept thinking, why was I drawn to this movie so much? It's about monkeys, hello, and apes. And, you know, there's so many things like about it. And my husband, he's the same, that's his favorite movie. And we just started talking and we're like, because he reminds us of Musa alayhi salam. We're not saying Musa alayhi salam is like a monkey at all. Absolutely not. But the leadership, the empathy, the strength, and that character that was able to display it, and the way the storyteller was able to do it through a monkey. What? And I was like, this is the best. And I was like, the reason why I liked it so much is because it's prophetic. That's really what my heart was attached to, the fact that it's a prophetic story about oppression and about a people who fought the chosen ones who were in the land, and they were led to their own world of, you know, kind of like an exodus. And yeah, that again is so relevant to what's happening right now. But subhanAllah, each person will take what they will from it and they will attribute it to, you know, their own version of the story, right? So anyway, I went off on a tangent over there, but
when you mentioned Quranic stories, I've got of like writing groups and things, and we always say that the story of Yusuf alayhi salam and the way it is in the Quran has a lot of the key storytelling elements that you need for an effective. That is why a lot of people, you know, so many people say their favorite story or their favorite surah.
My mom,
Surah Yusuf. I know 5 people just off the top of my head. And it's because it has that arc that most stories need. And again, we'll talk about that another time, but it has the elements that you need for that connection in order to change, for it to impact your soul almost.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And just saying that as well, just we don't want to get into the science too much of the story, but there's this idea sometimes it has to literally be by the book stories. And we had this conversation as well that it doesn't have to be by anyone's book. It just has to be your book. And all it really has to do is up, down, up, down, up, down. And there's your arc, you know? And then obviously like beginning, middle, and end. And, you know, you got to plan your own stuff there as well. But we overcomplicate things. We really do. And subhanAllah, you just need to be connected to this, your heart, when you're writing the story, and just write it. And that is how the whole topic of this is why stories matter. That is how your story is going to matter when it is connected and it comes from your heart, because the person reading it will connect to you and where that intention came from. And subhanAllah, I don't know if you've read some books or some stories where they hit all the points, but they don't hit this point, like this, the heart, it just doesn't hit it. And I always wonder, I'm like, why? Yeah. And these people are supposed to be like experts, you know? Yeah.
And you know what's interesting? With the rise of self-publishing, you have got a lot of books now that are out there that are quite in their raw form, the way they've come from the writer. And I remember seeing there were 2 books, both did quite well. But I connect with one of them, and I thought, and it was weird on the face of it. I read this book. I mean, it's been picked up by a traditional publisher now, so I'm wondering if it's slightly different. But at the time when it was self-published, I could see the setup. I could almost see the outline that she'd used, and the fact that it needed all these points and the formula of in a story. I could see all of it, and so the structure was very tight. She had a good character development. Everything was good, and I couldn't put my finger on it, and I realized I'm not feeling anything. Why am I feeling anything? And then there's another book that had also been self-published. The plot was all over the place.
I remember you told me about this. There
was no plot. You know, no plot whatsoever. It ended halfway through the story.
Oh wow!
And it had arc, no redemption, but the characters. Reading them, you could not stop reading them, as flawed as they were. And I thought that is so incredible to be able to see. And that book actually took off a lot more so than the other book. They both did quite well, but the one plot, people went, for want of a better word, feral for that book.
Wow. Okay.
The series that it became, and I was shocked. I couldn't get away from it as I was scrolling. Everybody was just losing their minds, wanting the next one. And I thought, nothing's happening in this book, but people are just obsessed with these characters, and in that, and there was that heart, and you could actually tell that the book written without a plot had so much heart in it. It was literally the writer's soul on the page, and that's what we were reading and not getting enough of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're so right. And you know, we've talked about so much today, subhanAllah. And what would be some takeaway points from our people who are here right now? I'm already reading something, so mashallah, I'm absolutely loving this talk, and I feel like it relates so much to how I've been feeling and what I've been thinking about lately and what's been going on in the world today. Jazakallah khair haq. And so inshallah, what main points would you take away from our viewers? What point would you take away, inshallah, and what main points would you take away from this as well, Sister Khadijah? And then I'll share a couple too, some insights maybe.
So everybody put in the comments as well what has been your favorite as well, definitely, because I'm really curious to see what you guys have said. But for me, it's how needed stories are. We need them. We have got to a point where they are no longer a luxury to waste time. They're more than just entertainment. And that depth of character and the human experience that we said, empathy, is so essential. And there's somebody who I admire quite a lot once told me, movies and stories are the terms and conditions for life. And she said, especially Hollywood movies, she said, they are telling you what they're doing.
Yeah.
The powers that be are telling you what they're capable of, what they have done, and what they intend to do. Those are the terms and conditions. You are watching it, but because it's seen as fiction or a story or it's not real, you tend to dismiss it. But
Yeah.
told you. And from that conversation, I started to wake up even more when I'm watching a movie or reading a book, and I'm thinking, what is the creator of this story? What is the writer? What are the actors? Well, not necessarily the actors, but the screenplay. What are they trying to tell me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that, and I think if everybody started looking at stories that way, you would see the benefit. You would learn and become what I like to call an active reader, and taking away the message that writer wanted you to have.
Yeah, that's so true. SubhanAllah, that's so powerful. To read consciously, right, and be aware, but also be open to different ideas and possibilities. But at the same time, don't be blinded. You know. So it's all about thinking for yourself. And I think the main thing that I got to thinking about was just our whole conversation has been so powerful and so relevant. And one of the biggest things I think is the hope. I think that's the biggest thing I'm taking away, is the hope that stories do matter and it is not wasting time at all. And the whole point of art is when we marry what is happening in the world right now, and we are able to show people what the world can be one day, inshallah. But in order to do that, we have to work on ourselves, and we have to do it from the heart. Because I think one big thing we tend to do sometimes is we try and teach lessons which we haven't learned, and a lot of lessons we will always keep learning, you know. But I think that would be so huge. One of the biggest lessons is empathy, which is not as easy as it sounds. Yeah, that was pretty huge.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to say as well. I was looking through the comments, and I've seen Shabana said that you're going to have to do a post, top 5 fluff for the disciples. And you know what? I'm going to do that, and I'm going to dedicate it to Shabana. I'm going to go through my box and find top 5 fluff reads. It's all about balance, so that's something else.
Yeah. It is. You're absolutely right. And as Sister Shabana also said, that the thing she took away is that words matter. Yeah, they do. And we each have our own way of giving words as well. We each have our own way of spreading our words and our voices as well. So Bismillah, right? In the name of Allah. So Jazakallah khair, Sister Khadijah, for honoring us with your presence. And Shabana's already titled your fluff reads. She says, Khadijah's fluff reads can be a thing right now.
Do you know what? I'm literally, I'm not just saying that. I'm going to go and do it. It's like going to be Khadijah's fluff reads dedicated to Shabana.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to take a few of them fluff reads because, yeah, I think I need to tone down with my serious reading sometimes as well. So, Bismillah.